Just going to talk mostly today about how the righteous anger of Jesus, leads to his restorative disruption in our lives toward his holy purpose. Turning worship environments into consumer marketplaces, that doesn't happen anymore, right? It's just like an old thing. Totally foreign to our world. This kind of stuff doesn't really happen anymore. I don't know if you guys saw, but just last week during the Easter festivities, there is a spiritual leader in this country named Paula White, who is the spiritual advisor of our current and sitting president, 47th president of the United States. And this spiritual advisor made a offering plea on social media and on YouTube and all over the place for her congregation, which unfortunately we have to claim is in Florida. We have to claim it. We have to do that. We're not going to do either of those, but Paula White is in our state and sort of our region. And in that Passover offering, it's one thing to just ask people to give. I mean, that's fine. It's no problem. But again, in that sort of like prosperity, health and wealth, promising kind of thing, a lot of times that invitation to be generous, to make an offering, comes with quid pro quo promises that God will do certain things for you if you give at certain levels. And so she offered last week, during Passover week, she offered that if you gave at a certain level, you would be the lucky recipient of a Holy Land communion set, which I was tempted to get pictures of and put on the TVs. I chose not to do that. A Holy Land communion set made up of 2 olive wood cups, grape juice, and unleavened bread from Israel. So good. And an instructional booklet on how to celebrate the Lord's Supper, written, directed, published by Paula White. So good. It's really, really, really good. And if you gave at a slightly enhanced level beyond that, you would also get an attractive commemorative box set to contain all these things. You can see that box set on Jeremy's desk at his house. It's the only one that I know of that secured such a thing. If you gave slightly more than that, you would also get Paula White's Passover devotional book, written, produced, published by Paula White. And if you want to read that, it's on the top of Tommy's stack. I think he secured that one. So we got that one. If you gave slightly more, you would get her DVD series and a special disc on instructional communion. It's a great question. The only person I know of that has one is Ezra, because he's watching that DVD set this weekend as we speak. If you gave over $1,000, you would get a beautiful 10-inch Waterford crystal cross. So excellent. Mike Malpedi has that, so you want to see it in his house. If you gave over $1,200, you would get 7 supernatural blessings unleashed on your life. Yes. The spiritual, 7. 7. That's a deal. If you gave over $1,500, God would assign an angel to you. Mine is named Frederick. Unclear. Fine print. This stuff doesn't happen these days, does it? This doesn't happen anymore, does it? This is stuff that doesn't just make us angry. It makes me angry. It makes all of us angry. But more importantly than that, it makes Jesus angry. Maybe the only point is that it makes Jesus angry. What do we do with an angry, and you could even argue slightly violent, Jesus in a story like this? I think it's important to start with clarity on why he was so angry. Remember, this is the week of Jewish Passover in Jerusalem, which meant that would be a crowded city. That would mean Jewish people from all over the ancient Near East would be trying to pilgrimage to Jerusalem. I mean, Jewish people all over what they knew as the known world would be trying to pilgrimage to Jerusalem to present themselves at temple. It would be a crowded city. For the purpose of worship. I mean, people would pilgrimage to meet with God. purify themselves, have presence, intimacy with God, confess, be clean, remember. It was about worship. It was about prayer. It was about presence. And there was a marketplace in those temple courts, where the temple courts would be just outside the temple. It would be on the way into the temple. And like Jeremy was saying, I mean, there were, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're like you need to make money, you're sort of a self-starter or whatever, what are you looking for? You're looking for clientele. You're looking for people. How am I going to get around people? How do I figure out what those people need, and how do I provide it? This is entrepreneurship. I need to get around bodies. I need to figure out what they need, and I need to provide what they need at a modest wage and price. This is entrepreneurship. So a marketplace had formed outside the temple, knowing that all these people, not just all year long, but specifically this week, all these people coming, they need some kind of sacrifices, and they need different types of sacrifices, and they need money changers. They need to exchange currency into the type of currency that you need to be able to pay temple tax. Or you might need to change currency to be able to pay the vendor, the specific marketplace vendor that you're trying to buy the sacrifices for. There's all kinds of needs that people had in order to get into the temple and to do the things that they came to do. And so a marketplace emerges. Now, is that marketplace technically illegal? No. The problem is that the religious leaders at the time who could have done something about it, not only did they do nothing, they sanctioned it. They approved it. They allowed it. They made room for it. So what makes Jesus so angry that he drove them out, overturned the tables, and called them a den of robbers? And in other tellings, not this one, but in other tellings, actually crafted a whip out of supplies that he could find to drive them out. Well, I think there's three things that contributed to his anger. Three things. One of them probably the biggest one, and the other two contributing. Actually probably symptomatic of the first one. The first one is that Jesus is angry when his Father's house is leveraged for self-gain of any kind. When it should only be a house of self-giving, self-forgetfulness, self-denial for God's sake, God's glory, God's renown. It should be centered on God, not on us and our livelihood and our glorification and our needs, all that kind of stuff. These people were just using the temple, using at that time the Father's house, but actually God's worship, God's presence, connection with God, using that, commoditizing it, leveraging it for a richer personal life. This certainly still doesn't happen, does it? I remember my brother, I think it was 2014, my older brother, he's 2 years older than me, he was hired to work at a church in Seattle that will remain unnamed. And he moved his whole family across the country to work at a church in Seattle. And about 3 or 4 months before he took that job and moved his whole family over there to be the executive pastor of a church in Seattle, the lead pastor of that church had published a book on marriage, a very popular book on marriage. And it was sort of all the rage. Everybody was talking about it at the time. The book will remain unnamed. That leader will remain unnamed. So my brother took that job. He moved there in January, and 1 month later, less than 30 days later in February, the secret started coming out that the church had used its church budget, funded by donors, givers, to purchase warehouses full of that book to drive it up to the New York Times top 10 list. And they were still sitting on pallets of that book in storage that they had purchased just to manipulate the New York Times to try to make it more popular. And they had used God's money to do that. Not their money. It's not how this works. And we're essentially now trying to drive the sales of that book heavily. Where? In their lobby, and any lobby that would take it, and any conference that would take it. And they just couldn't move it. They just couldn't push it. And my brother, the executive pastor, what do executive pastors do? A lot of times what they do is they look at the books. And they're in control of the fiduciary responsibility of the books. And so my brother was sort of caught in the middle of that whole thing. And that became a serious major controversy that resulted in the demise of that network of churches later that year. A community that had taken marketplace ideas, money ideas, out of the hands of God to drive celebrity, self-gain, self-benefit, to build individual or corporate or communal kingdoms, not God's kingdom. But forget about Paula White. Forget about Seattle Unnamed Church. That's not our table to flip. That's not my table to flip. It's not my fight to pick. It's not my role to play. That's Jesus' job. That's what he does. And he's been doing it, and he's going to keep doing it, and we can trust him to do it when he needs to do it, and in his timing and in his way to do it. What about our network? What about our microchurches? What about my microchurch? What about you personally? Has worship or prayer or ministry life itself for you, for your microchurch, has it shifted for you from what was once self-denial to now self-fulfillment? Has it shifted for you away from what was once self-forgetfulness to what is now self-discovery or self-actualization or self-obsession? Has it shifted from what you can give to what you get out of it? Has it shifted from what was best for the kingdom and for others to what's best for you? This is a gnarly shift that can be made in the hearts of leaders and in the scope family of microchurches and in the life of a network. And the moment that shift happens, no matter how subtle or egregious it becomes, no matter how simple or more profound and robust it becomes, it's tables that he's coming for. It's things that need driven out the moment that shift happens. We've set up tables that he comes for. He builds a whip for. He comes after to flip. For our good and for his glory and renown. The second thing is, I think Jesus is angry when convenience overrules his people's mandate to the lost. So much of this marketplace that's sort of been created in the temple courts just outside the temple, so much of this marketplace actually creates additional barriers to worship for the lost. For people that are either right there in Jerusalem or they're coming from far away, and what they want is like nearness to God, worship with God, hunger for God, desperation for God. I want to hear from God. I want to be right with God. I want to be cleansed. I want to know. I want to understand. I mean, think about the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts. That's an example of somebody who came from a long way away. Why? Because he just wants to be at the temple. He can't even go inside the thing. But he wants to be at the temple, near the temple, come to pray, come to know God. There's a hunger for God. And this marketplace creates additional barriers to worship, additional barriers to God himself, to reconciliation, to presence. But this is the God who leaves the 99 in search of the one who is lost. Amen? But these temple courts further disregard the one who is lost for the sake of the conveniences and consumer services of the 99 who are already found. I think that enrages the heart of God, a holy anger with the heart of God, when his people trade his love and pursuit of those who are lost for our own self-conveniences. I remember reading several years ago a church in California, which will remain unnamed, that had, I was trying to research, I was in the middle of a research project trying to research the most expensive and robust church facility in the West. And this one wasn't it, but it was the one that I found the most fascinating. This church in California had two food courts. Who needs two? One is plenty, especially if you have VJK. You don't need any more. I mean, Sbarro's, get a Sbarro's in there. You don't need any more. They had 2 food courts. They had 3 coffee shops. They had a grocery store in the church. They had an artificial lake with a walking path. They had a movie theater with IMAX. They had a rock climbing wall. They had a professional tax service. I don't even know why you'd want that. It'd be one thing if you built like a center like that with all these like goods and services and all that kind of stuff, and it existed for the community, existed for the city. It was like, we're going to provide for the community something that it doesn't have. We're going to be a gift to the city in some way. But there was an independent study done to evaluate the usage of all of those churches' facilities back in 2018. And they came to the conclusion that people outside the church accounted for less than 2% of the facility usage of everything that they had built. It's a temple devoted to the 99. You see that? A temple devoted to those who are found, with a disregard for the one who is lost or for the God who pursues the one that's lost. The heart of the God who pursues the one that is lost. But forget about California Church. That's not our table to flip. It's not my table to flip. That's Jesus' job. What about our network? What about our microchurches? What about you? What about me? In your personal life, does a desire for convenience invade our worship in a way that disconnects us from God's zeal for the lost? Have you filled the outer courts of your life? Because remember now, we're temple. God lives in us. We're temple. And have you filled the outer courts of your life with convenience, leaving no room in your heart, your desire, your social networks, or your calendar for people who don't know Jesus? I think God has a holy dissonance, a holy anger, a corrective word for us, if that's you or that's me. And the third and final thing is I think Jesus is angry when we exclude the poor from participation in community and in the life of the church. I think that enrages the heart of God in a holy way. That old temple system wasn't meant to intentionally exclude the poor. It was never meant to do that, but it functionally did. It found its way to doing that. And you can see in the Old Testament that the prophets had a whole lot of things to say about when God's people disregard, exclude, do not bring justice to the poor, as a symptom of a first and primary symptom of what they would call idolatry, that they would always be calling out. And that carries over into this New Testament scene. That doesn't still happen, does it? The exclusion of the poor from community, the barriers to the poor, to the heart of God, the life of the church, worship and prayer, presence of the Lord. I've seen over time, I haven't been in an actual like prevailing model, like non-underground church service in a long, long time. I mean, 10 plus years. But, you know, Jamie and I and our family, pre-2015, we would be in a lot of different church environments for 6 or 7 years while we were up in Illinois. And I can't even count how many times I saw homeless people removed from church services because of what they were wearing, because they weren't up to some sort of mystical standard, code of conduct, like for what they were wearing. I've seen homeless people removed from worship because of how they smelled, because they couldn't they couldn't get in the shower, couldn't take a shower. Now I understand like the New Testament sort of principles around like orderly worship and distraction. Guys, that's not what this is. It's not what this is. People's clothes aren't right, they're excluded. Their smells aren't right, they're excluded. If they don't have a certain intellectual IQ, they get excluded, they get removed from participation in the life of the church. But forget about all those things. Those aren't our tables to turn. That's not your table to turn. It's not my table to turn. That's Jesus' job. What about us? What about our network? What about our microchurch? What about you? What about me? Does our community, does your community, does our microchurch require a level of income to be at home in it? Does our microchurch require a level of education or a standard of life to be allowed full, validated participation in the life of the church? To be God's people, to be worshipful in his presence, to be reconciled to him, to confess and receive absolution. Do we accidentally create those barriers, set up those tables that need driven out? I think Jesus gets angry when worship is commoditized for our benefit, when worship excludes the poor, and when worship disconnects us from his heart for the lost. But the anger of Jesus is not like our anger. Thank God. The anger of Jesus is not like our anger. It is not punitive. It is not meant solely for destruction. It is not passive-aggressive or avoidant. He doesn't just get angry and leave us alone, thank God. He doesn't get angry and decide to crush us for his own sort of enjoyment. He is not like us. The anger of Jesus leads to disruption, but it is restorative disruption, a disruption that returns us to his heart, his way, his holiness, his presence. It's a removal of things that are actually ultimately hurting us, hurting me, hurting our communities, hurting our families, hurting our network, removing things that are barriers to him so that we may be reordered, renewed by him, in him. It was mentioned in the Bible study, immediately after this sort of like very disruptive outburst happens, what comes immediately after? The blind and the lame came to him in the temple and were healed. And children were shouting in the temple courts, Hosanna to the Son of David. What happened when he purified the temple, when he flipped tables and drove stuff out? What happened in that void? Now we suddenly have a proper temple worship. That's what this is. We have temple where there was not temple. We have holy worship, beautiful worship. We have a place where the broken can find healing from Jesus, where the lonely can find intimacy with Jesus, where the desperate can find peace in Jesus, where sinners can confess to Jesus and receive mercy from Jesus, where the blind can find sight in Jesus, and where the weary can find rest in Jesus. Now we have temple worship. So you see, feeling that holy anger, clearing the temple courts, crafting a whip, driving people out, flipping the tables was only half the story. It wasn't even the main point of the story. The disruption was meant to restore worship and intimacy. This is the restorative disruption of Jesus. He's trustworthy, and that disruption can be disorienting, but it can be trusted. It's the best thing for us. And every table standing as a barrier must be overturned, that we may be restored fully to his heart, his holiness, his presence again. My family right now, in this season, we're in a lot of disruption, and I just want to share about that briefly. I still remember in 2016, 2016, when we were leading a network of microchurches up outside of St. Louis, east of St. Louis, and that microchurch network was a sister movement with the Underground. I'd been sort of felt like friends with this network for probably 6-7 years at that point, since 2009, 2010. And Brian Sanders, who I don't think is here this morning, called me one day and said, can I have a layover in St. Louis? I have like a quick 1-hour layover in St. Louis. Can we just grab lunch while I'm in town? And I said, that's fine. And I drove over and I picked him up from the airport and I said, where are you coming from and where are you going to? And he said, I came from Tampa to here and I'm going back to Tampa. And I said, that's not a layover. That's you came here to have lunch with me. That's what that is. And I was immediately very nervous. I was like, what's happening? Am I going to get fired or am I in trouble? And we sat down at a restaurant called the Shaved Duck. And we had lunch for a little bit, and he started sharing early on in that conversation. I could tell within the first 5 seconds that he was going to ask if Jamie and I would move to Tampa. But as Brian does, he took about 20 minutes to get to that question. You got to sort of ride the coaster with him and get there. And he eventually asked, and I knew instantaneously we were supposed to go. Because we had a bunch of stuff circumstantially that were happening in our lives that was sort of like we were already sort of wondering, God, what are you doing? And we're not really sure what's happening. And I was sitting in this conversation, I just felt like, oh, this is it. And we just didn't know. And Jamie and I knew pretty much right away that we were supposed to go. We were supposed to come to Tampa and be a part of this community, 2016. And it took us 2 months to say yes. And Brian is known to be very patient. So the 2 months was fine. And that 2 months from we know we're supposed to go to actually saying yes was just 2 months of tables being turned over. That's all it was. The invitation, we knew what we were supposed to do, and it was just all the things that were hanging us up from saying yes were just tables. There was stuff that I'd get driven out. Things that we were closing our fist around that weren't ours to close our fist around. Things we expected, dreams we had, expectations we had. We cherished at that time, sort of being close to our family. We'd never left Illinois before. We had committed part of a neighborhood, gave a lot of years to a neighborhood there, loved the community that we were with, all of our college friends. We just sort of stayed together. But it became clear that we were supposed to say yes, and we were supposed to let those tables be flipped, let the disruption happen, and trust the Lord that He's got us joys on the other side. That we were going to discover more of Him, more of His character. All of you, it was so amazing over the years and in that time. And some of you are already aware, but I just wanted to be able to say it for the first time publicly that Jamie and I and the kids are moving back to Illinois in probably the late summer, second half of the summer. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about this because I'm not leaving right now. So there's a lot of things I want to say to you, and I want to say on behalf of us to you and for you. But now's not the time. I'm still hanging. We're around. We can get lunches. We can go grab pizza. We can do coffee. We're good. And I don't want to do that right now, and I don't think I'd be capable of doing that right now, if that's okay. So we've still got a few months here. I'm not leaving the underground. I'm not resigning. We're moving. Most of my work for the last 15 to 18 months has been working with underground-ish types of leaders that are around the country and around the world that are trying to lead microchurch networks just like this. They're trying to plant and emerge and collaborate with what God is doing in the city. And so most of my job is not really entangled with Tampa, and there's some reason to believe that there's parts of that job that I could do better from a central geography, and that realization comes simultaneous to a season in both of our families that we feel the permission from the Lord to get involved in some things in my family and things in my wife's family that have been very difficult. But I want to be really clear that we're not going home because you have become our home. And we're not going back to family because you have become our family. It actually feels like we're, just like 2016 again, it feels like we're leaving home. And it feels like we're leaving our family again. And it took us a while to be able to name it and to embrace it because there's a whole bunch of reasons why there's a whole bunch of tables in Jamie and I that needed to be flipped. Expectations for our life, love for you, hopes and dreams, aspirations, things that we closed our fist around. And we basically set up a little marketplace outside the temple of our lives and buying and selling and trading, things that were about us. It was for me, it was about me, things that I tied up in, and we just couldn't hear the still small voice of the Lord anymore saying it's time. And it didn't take me 2 months this time, it took me 59 days. To say yes. Sanctification,
But we love you. We're all in. We're going to be back in Tampa. We're probably a few times a year. So you can't get rid of me. I'm sorry. You're stuck with me forever. Just in maybe smaller doses. But I'm tempted to fill the temple courts of my life with a marketplace of buying and selling for my own conveniences, my own comfort, my own aspirations, my own dreams. And I'm just being freshly reminded of that all over again. That I don't want the tables turned. I don't want the things driven out. I want my stuff. I want my expectations. I want my control. I want my safety, my comforts, my conveniences. And in some ways, actually going to Illinois this summer was going to be harder and worse than what it felt like to come in 2016. How is Jesus disrupting you in this season? Disrupting your microchurch, disrupting us? Because you are His temple. His presence lives in you. So what is He driving out? What tables is He turning? What is He purifying? What's He restoring in you? If Emily can come up and be able to lead us in a time of reflection and confession, I just want to give us some space before communion to really wrestle with that question of tables and what's being driven out, and to take the less traveled path from this text of not trying to wonder what are the tables that I'm supposed to go flip in the world or in others, and actually travel the less traveled path. God, what are you flipping in me, in us? What are you driving out in me, in us? The question for us isn't where are the tables in our world? What are the tables I'm supposed to flip? That's what Jesus does. The question is what tables in me, in us, in you. And that might sound intensely confrontational. Might sound risky. It's safe to open yourself up to hear from the Lord in that way. But I love these words, this good news. That in the void of that disruption, the children were shouting in the temple courts. That Jesus has something joyful for you on the other side of the disruption. Something beautiful, something innocent, something playful to fill up the very void that disruption might leave. And we can trust that it'll come. We can trust Him in the disruption because we can trust the joy that'll be there on the other side. He wants to heal you. Like the blind and the lame. He wants to restore your sight. He wants to put a word of worship on your lips that you can't help but shout, Hosanna, Hosanna to the Son of David. He wants that word of worship to flow from an embodied testimony, a story of what He's done and is doing in you.